Okay. Welcome, everybody. Hopefully, you've had a good first full day here in Atlanta at ITW. Got your exercise in, running back and forth. You get to sit down, listen to us for an hour. And we've got a pretty of the moment hot topic for you in terms of our session on mitigating security threats as a wholesale carrier. Can I get a show of hands in the room? Who offers a security service of any kind today? Oh, great. Yeah. And of those, who's planning on offering a service as soon as they can? No, so it's a black and white group here. We've got yes or no, security, or I'm staying completely away from it. Great. So I just want to encourage you through the session. If you're not familiar with it, there is a great app, Slido, right from your phone. You can send in questions, remain anonymous. Well, also at certain points, as it looks like I'll break and there's a wandering mic here, we'll open up for questions. But as you can see, we have got a very large and great group here, very broad background. So we are going to talk about security in a couple different ways and get some good perspective. Okay. So what threats are impacting network today? You know, as we are globally looking at applications, data, and services and wanting it to be available in any location, pushing it to the edge and looking at pushing it to edge over multiple environments, fixed, mobile, other IT infrastructures. And there's no indication of that stopping. That data moving around and our utilization of it is only increasing. And that means a dependable connectivity is non-negotiable. However, in transporting that high capacity data, it's necessary not only to meet the user's satisfaction, but it's creating new vulnerabilities and vulnerabilities that we need to look at and think about in terms of achieving reliability. So now, as such, reliability becomes so closely tied with security and business continuity. Okay, so I'm going to start off with the group here with the first question, because what we really want to look at is how a carrier, an operator can address security with their connectivity solutions to be successful. What are some of the things to think about? What are some of the things to put into the portfolio? So we're going to start off with a pretty open-ended question. And when I do so, team, please introduce yourself and the company you're with, just to give a little perspective for the audience that's here. And that question is, how is the carrier community preparing for this next wave of threats that are coming out? And I'm going to start with Jade. Do you want to go first?
Okay. My name is Jade Kerr. I'm with Bluebird Network. We're a wholesale and enterprise internet service provider, transport provider. How are we planning to deal with it? The future threats is a pretty broad question, honestly. We're researching technologies in the field presently and emerging to help better mitigate the biggest threats, such as DDoS that attack our customers, other penetration vulnerabilities that are native to our routers and theirs, not necessarily towards servers that the DDoS attacks are typically targeted towards. And a lot of just malware awareness, being able to detect that, quarantine it before it hits our network or our customer's network. A lot of the challenge right now is the customers aren't exactly sure what they want or need. So as we're researching and trying to develop products around it, there's a lot of uncertainty from our own customers of whether they need it, whether they want to do it in-house or try to outsource it to their provider, us, and really what that threat protection should look like. So the short answer really is just a lot of research and keeping our finger on the pulse while proposing solutions, like actual available solutions to our customers that are still uncertain whether they want us to do it or not.
Okay. Michael.
I think there's a whole myriad of security, especially network security related work that gets done. I think there's tool sets that you can provide to customers, like selective black holing, black hole routing, some of those things that are just part and parcel of being a customer of a network. I think just being involved in, kind of internet community oriented groups like the group that Ryan's a part of, Internet Society. And I know he's going to talk about Manners and some of the work that they do, as well as things like RPKI from a route announcements perspective, and driving some of those initiatives kind of at a broader, internet perspective. And there's obviously offering solutions to customers, like what Jay was just talking about, and providing, for us, we provide a kind of a suite of DDoS mitigation solutions for customers where they can kind of pick the right type of offering that they kind of meets their needs, whether that's kind of full automatic mitigation, or whether that's just a layer of ACLs or something in between. And I think most of our customers generally don't look at security with a single solution. They're doing certain things in-house, they're doing certain things with third-party vendors, and then they're also doing certain things with network providers they have. And so some combination of those solutions are usually what each customer kind of identifies based upon their threat, kind of the target that they are. And we have some customers who are huge targets and get attacked all the time. And we have other customers who are very low on the radar screen and just there's a lot of reason for them to be attacked. So their need for services, their need for solutions is lower in many cases. Like it's just like security for your home. Depending where you live, you may have an armed guard out in front of your condominium, or you may just have a dog in the front yard, or you may have, some combination of those things. I think it's really, similar to that in regards to what companies need to do is based upon their kind of profile and their kind of target they are in the landscape.
Okay, great. Also, I'm going to come right back to you. Yeah, I'm going to come back to you.
Okay.
I promise.
So we are getting ready at Orange. So I'm Elsa Huguet working for Orange International Carriers. So we are wholesalers. So we sell OTI to our customer. We sell internet connectivities, and basically without any protection, it's really unsafe. So we're pushing our customer to be protected with a DDoS protections because of the threats coming, and the way we prepare for them and we try to convince them it's important to do it because we want to be a responsible carriers. We enable them to resell the solution to their customers because our customers are not enterprises, it's carriers. They have customers. And we want to offer them the opportunity to resell the solutions because it's usually the question is, do I really need to get protected? Do I really need to spend money on a protection? I'm not even sure I need it. So by going through a way to get the money and create business value to our customer, it's a way for them to be convinced that not only will they be protected, but they will create business with that.
Very good. And Ryan, I know you wanted to jump in.
Sure. So going off what Michael was just talking about, so I work for the Internet Society, which is a global nonprofit, and we support something called the Mutually Agreed Norms for Routing Security. This is an initiative that's made up of 150 network operators and growing, a group that has made a visible, measurable, and actionable commitment to increasing their routing security practices, making them better. And one thing going back to what Michael just said is talking about whether or not you're under threat. And I think one key thing that's changing is enterprises and governments especially are starting to realize that there's unintended consequences whether or not you were the one who's specifically under threat from a routing incident or from a route leak, for instance. The effects are widespread. And so when reliability is key for enterprises, it's really up to network operators to do their part and collaborate with one another so that they're taking the basic actions to keep themselves safe. I'd add on to what you're talking about, collaboration as a key aspect, which is as simple as, can you actually contact a network operator if they have a route leak? Can you find their information and talk to them and get them to fix it? If not, you've got a problem. And 13% of network operators of ASNs, you can't actually contact them right now. And so it's a basic thing to fix that we need to be taking those basic steps right now to fix routing security issues.
Okay. Malik.
Well, thank you. Now, I think that from my, first, I'm Malik Aisi, taking charge of business assurance and risk management for iBasis. To answer directly your question, I think from my perspective, it's not a question of if we will be hit by cyber attacks or any of those security issues, but it's a question of when. All of us are exposed as a business or as individuals exposed to those threats. So then the question is, what kind of strategy should be put in place to protect yourself and protect your partners and your customers? For a basis, I think that the point where we're starting is first to have a zoom back and try to have a holistic view on those threats. What does it mean? Mean that we have a business assurance approach, which is seeing that between fraud and security, there is an accelerating convergence. Why I'm saying that? It's very easy. I can give some examples, but before I go to those examples, just a few numbers to give you magnitudes of what we are exposed to. The CFCA have done a study where they show that the industry is exposed around 30 billion, and on those 30 billion losses, Wholesale is bearing 30% of those losses. And they are composed by different types of security as an enabler to go to fraud. I can give some examples. If you take some example related with numbering hijacking or PIN calls or international revenue share or PBX hacking, or even SIP session and CLI manipulation, you see that directly there's a link between utilizing vulnerabilities from security level, ending up with stealing assets from our traffic, voice traffic or data traffic. So this is our first approach, converging fraud and security issues. The second is just fix the basics. Fix the basics means, one, build the appropriate architecture, 3 layers architecture, which is, from my perspective, going from the infrastructure component, OSS and BSSs, built-in security there from provisioning and all those things we are dealing with in network level. Adding what is today missing for me in the picture, which is RSS, risk support systems. Those risk supports are mainly oriented to monitor the events and to react to them. When I say security operation centers or CIMs, until building governance and risk compliance, because we are exposed also to GDPR things, you can understand that that architecture is very important to strengthen and to make it robust and resilient. Third, and I let it here, we as IBASI, we are committing to deliver a real new experience of trust, because we know that we are business in the middle, because our interconnectivity with others, and we are committing to deliver because we are on the GLF and COC Code of Conduct committing to protect that business. So this is first side of what I can say.
Good introduction. We'll come back around when we're talking about implementation and efficiencies on those layers and the risk. Matt, if you could introduce and.
Sure. I'm Matt Wickline with AT&T Cybersecurity. As far as DDoS goes, some stuff has obviously changed over the last few years, and now we're dealing with more server-based DDoS. But what AT&T does, number one, we have 8 security operation centers around the world, so we're always on. And we monitor the 65,535 UDP and TCP protocols. We do that to try to define where the epicenters or where the origination points are for the DDoS attacks. And then we use geo-blocking techniques to try to cut them off at the pass. We've also added the Radware box in addition to Arbor box to our backbone to defend against some of the new IoT bots and some of the risks in relation to the server-based, or what we now call volumetric or center flood attacks. We, in addition to that, we monitor over 500 active bots. I can't tell you exactly. We do it for the United States government, and we do it to try to, again, cut them off at the pass before they can impact our global network or the wholesale connections that we're selling to you. We offer a managed DDoS in 186 countries, and we're using NetFlow to monitor that DDoS service, and then we're able to proactively turn up the defenses for the carrier, for that end customer, hopefully before their service is ever impacted, and then they can stay connected and have the information available.
Okay, great. Jim. Yes. We're going to finish up, but I'm just going to flip the question around a little bit on you. And what should carriers be thinking about in preparing for these increasing threats?
Okay, well, name's Jim Carnes, Chief Security Architect for Ciena. And I think I have a different perspective than most of the panels here. I come from the offensive side of the house, right? So prior to joining Ciena, I worked for the Department of Defense, doing network attack and then defending those enterprise networks. So I have a little bit more of an enterprise perspective as opposed to the service provider. And I'm also looking at, how I can actually get into those networks and then turn around and figure out how to defend those, right? So I think a trend that you're going to see, certainly within Ciena and the things that we're looking at, traditionally from that is used by probably the majority of the people on the stage, but what additional information should you be getting from your vendors, right? What additional capabilities should you be expecting them to provide you to enable the intelligence that we've talked about, right? I mean, you're hearing references to NetFlow, you hear references to other types of analytics that are being driven. And from our perspective, it's what can we do with not only our hardware, but from our software to actually make that information more context sensitive and be able to make those decisions that you're going to be able to respond to in real time. So I think the real key there, to asking from the vendor perspective, is to say we're giving you equipment and software that's giving you better information with more context so that you can make those decisions and respond faster.
Great. Well, we are at a wholesale conference, so I do want to kind of go down and talk a little bit about what role is a wholesale carrier. We talked about selling to enterprise and the enterprise demand and some of the policy, but as a wholesale carrier, what is that role in mitigating risk that needs to be played? And actually, Ryan, why don't I start with you? I'd love your opinion on that.
Sure thing. So I think wholesale carriers are really interestingly placed as a group that can be leaders on this issue, especially in routing security. Whether it's as simple as filtering out bad route announcements, wholesale carriers are well placed to do that, to validating routes that on IR databases, or validating the routes using ROAS and RPKI. They're well placed to do this and cut down on some of the things that we feel in the personal realm when we can't get to a website, or even in the policy realm when you have your constituencies asking, why did the internet seem to go down for a day? One thing that I'm starting to see more on the policy side, so I work as a policy advisor at the Internet Society working on cybersecurity issues, is we're seeing governments a lot more interested in routing security than we ever have before. And the reason for that is simple. We all rely on the internet more than we used to, and it's a lot more apparent when something goes wrong, especially when something big goes wrong. And when something big goes wrong, you've got policymakers who are being asked questions of, hey, why did this happen? And so I think as an industry, we have a really important time to take leadership and to show visible change and to show the things that we're actually doing to help fix these problems, and show this not only to your customers who may not quite recognize yet that security matters to them, but also show it to governments and regulators who are starting to realize that there's an issue here and might be taking the wrong actions as a result.
Okay, great. Jade.
Sure. So the question, what should the wholesale carriers be doing?
Yeah.
Is that right? Roughly?
Should, what's the role?
What's the
What
role
role are
of
you
the
playing?
wholesale?
Or what
Yes.
should you be doing?
Sure,
That's-
sure. So the wholesale component of our business, I would say that a primary role is to mitigate as much threat as possible. And that's a challenging role as a wholesale carrier because we're relatively agnostic as to what that traffic over the network should be. So we use technologies to monitor the traffic via flow information and detect threats, attacks to the extent that we can. And that might be volumetric to IPs in our customers' networks. It might be volumetric to our IPs that we use internally for our network. And it might be something completely different, like TCP attacks, synthetic traffic acknowledgements attacks. So it's not very simple, and I think more importantly, it's evolving. So the policy that we set today isn't the same as the policy we had 6 months ago, and isn't the same policy that we'll have a year from now. We need to be on top of the security threats, the nature of the threats, the attacks, and the traffic that make up those threats. That said, we have policies in place, whether our customers necessarily want them in place or not, to protect not only them, unbeknownst to their needs, but to other customers. If one customer on our network is being attacked through just a flood of volume, then that affects everybody else on sharing that same backbone network. So there's some degree of responsibility to be able to identify it and shut it down, whether the customer knows that or not. More specifically, we do work with our customers and offer in this case, DDoS security product that works with them to identify the types of traffic, the types of attack that we can protect against. Centric to our network and its own performance, independent of the customers. Obviously, the customers are the reason we have the network, but I think important to recognize and enforce our updates to attacks directly to our own network infrastructure. And some of those that we've experienced or that I've experienced throughout my career aren't DDoS necessarily. It's attacks to routing protocols directly on your router, sending time to live packets of 0 that make your router process that and overload the processor, or sending other types of control protocol traffic that isn't your typical DDoS, but it affects your router directly. It can take down the network, not an endpoint on your network that we're accustomed to in the conversation of DDoS. And the role of the carrier there is to have an updated, patched, secure network, just to the extent that these new threats are detected and they're mitigated via the vendors that develop patches for them, or protection mechanisms of the control processors themselves or of the line cards not to be overloaded with the malicious traffic. So kind of summary, as a wholesale carrier, to be fairly agnostic but responsible to be able to mitigate the threats that we can.
Okay, so I think Jade touched on a lot of great points. I think all those points make tons of sense. I think the things I would add to that would be, and no offense to Jim, but hardware vendors at times will make claims about their hardware and the performance of the software. We think one of the first things before you actually are running a network is to test gear, to test software in lab environments as well as in pseudo production environments to see what the actual impact is. And so this isn't about Sienna, but I'll give you a story where we were told by a vendor about a card, the ability to handle PPS levels in regards to attacks. When we put those cards through kind of testing protocols that we do, they didn't come anywhere close. So we ultimately had to make a decision to go in a different direction in regards to the cards we were deploying to make sure and hit the levels of throughput on a PPS level so that a DDoS attack didn't negatively affect the entire router, right, or that card. So those kinds of things I think are part of the planning and the architecture and the design you do of your network. And then I think, again, as Jade talked about, some of the things you do in regards to operation and implementation are all, solid kind of approaches as well. We tend as a global tier 1 network to want to make sure we're giving our customers as many tools as possible, whether that's around routing announcements, whether it's the RPK IROA stuff that Ryan's talked about, as well as supporting all those different options. So again, customers can kind of apply the pieces that are most appropriate to what their network need is or what their requirement is for their network. And so that certainly extends into security as well. And again, some of the things I touched on before. I think it's important to really think about it philosophically as What are the things we can do as a proactive way, which I think is some of the IRR based stuff, some of the things that are required to maintain kind of routes, kind of legitimacy, and then also what do you do in a reactive way in regards to attack happening across the network? What are the tools you're going to employ to do that and have those things deployed in place? Some of the stuff that Matt talked about in regards to Arbor boxes or other tool sets that you have, including the flow data. So those are all parts of that answer. It's actually an exceptionally broad answer to the question. We'll probably all touch on different points of it, but I mean, those are things I would add a little bit to what's already been said.
Great. And actually, Matt, what can you add to that?
From an AT&T perspective, we're using both our private data and also public exchange data. So the OTX, or the Open Threat Exchange, has over 120,000 security engineers that contribute to it. So we glean that information. But then we have 1,000 people dedicated in our chief security office to threat mitigation and identification. And so we pass about a third of all the world's data, over 260 petabytes of data a day. And we get about 200,000 malicious scans against that network on a daily basis. So what we're doing is we're taking that information and we're passing it over to the really, really smart guys in Bell Labs and AT&T Labs, and we're coming up with 3 to 4 new security patents a week now. We have 176 in total. And essentially, we're taking both the open threat data and our network data. We're sending it into Bell Labs, and we're very quickly trying to come up with the signatures. If we waited for the CERT time frame, right, the emergency response time frame for the development of signatures, that timeline looks somewhere between 90 to 120 days. For a carrier, that's just not fast enough to come up with these mitigations or signatures, right? So we have our own internal system, 1,000 people dedicated to it, and we're backed by the really smart guys at AT&T Labs who are then taking that information and creating those signatures or those patents that help defend our network.
Very good. Also, you're doing wholesale. What is kind of your role that's been successful?
As wholesaler, I think we have mostly 3 responsibility. First one is driving up awareness, customer awareness. I said it before, but it's important that cybercrime is one of the open-ended risk where you can never do enough. And you have to convince that you have to do something about it. So we have to, because we are carriers as well, we exactly know the pain because we suffer from them. So we are legitimate. We know the issue our customers are facing, and we know how to act upon it because we have the same. So first, and that go through education, explaining everything. That's first thing. Second thing is having the proper solution, simple to implement, easy to understand, because usually our customers, they don't have the power of a ATT, right? Or Orange Cyber Defense with plenty of experts that can deal with threats. They need help on that. They don't have the capacity, the manpower capacity to do the job. So they really rely on people to do it for them and having managed customer solution. And third point is for us to be ready for anything and reacting whenever, for instance, we're currently working on a DNS solution because DNS is like, a other threat as big as DDoS. So we already have something, but we are developing a solution for our customers. So it's listening to the insight of the industry, knowing what is important to protect. We selling mobile networks. So JSMA said it's important that we prevent the hijacking of the SS7 protocol. So we developed solutions for that. So it's listening as well to the industry and to what is happening in the world and do something about the major threats.
Okay, thank you. Malik, I know when we talked, you had some interesting thoughts on wholesale.
Yeah, I think that if you are, as I said, I wouldn't say the man in the middle because it had a bad connotation of the bad guy, but we are the business in the middle. If you are conveying a lot of around 30 billion or even plus minutes from A to Z, you have a big responsibility. And that responsibility is just to protect as a jumbo jet when you go from Paris to London. Your responsibility is to bring safe what you have in your jumbo jet. And when you are a wholesaler, you are compared to a kind of jumbo jet. You are conveying the values and the assets of retail customers from A to Z. But it's not that easy because we are in a long chain of sell and buy. And we need first to talk within the industry how we can strengthen that chain of responsibility in terms of fighting fraud and security issues, internal the industry. The second is, as we are business in the middle and we have connectivity, IPX signaling, meaning when the things are happening, even before they hit, we have possibility to identify, to detect, and to prevent. We need to strengthen our way to scrutinize what is going in our signaling level, IPX or GRX, all the vulnerabilities we can identify by using different means. It go from penetration tests or using means like DPI or other meanings to go in depth on the packets and to know what we are conveying and should we stop or let it go. This is our strong responsibility, I think.
Excellent. One of the threads that went through all of what you were saying is definitely tools, analytics, speed of analytics. And I'm going to throw a complete curveball question out there. So not, but how does with the introduced virtualization, software-defined networks, and all of this change, does that help or add more complexity to be addressed for security? Or still a wait and see? Go ahead.
Both.
Both.
You got to ask open-ended questions.
Yeah.
I don't know how much it affects it, but it definitely has an effect on both sides. So
okay. Good, excellent. So it's giving you some new tools, but it's also introducing some more complexity and probably some more threats. Okay, well, great. So along those lines, new solutions such as IoT, multi-cloud are entering some of these vulnerabilities in multiple threats. What are the expected areas of opportunity that you're seeing to provide security services that you can share with the audience? Matt, I'm going to start right back up
sure.
with you.
So, cyber hygiene is key, right? No matter whether you run a network the size of AT&T's or a small enterprise network or a medium-sized carrier, there's certain practices that you have to do, right? And then you have to take the information that you find and feed it back into your policies, your procedures. It's more than just the technology at the end of the day. It's the people, process, and the technology. So you have to constantly glean the information. You have to constantly feed it back over into your strategy, and then make sure that it's not just about the technology. To your point with the SD-WAN, it's easier to update with software-defined networks, it's easier to update and patch some of those things, but you also have to patch them more often. That's why I said both.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I hope that answers some of the question that you asked.
Okay.
Yeah, but I think that those opportunities and threats coming with the new technology like SDN or NFV, as we are talking about software-defined network, we need to concentrate on the way we develop those softwares and the APIs we need to build and to exchange. So we become more complex, more fragile, having more velocity, but at the same time, if we don't change our way to build software and embedding from the beginning security aspects in the way we build software, we will not be really in the position to have 100% advantages from the SDN. Instead, we'll be more exposed to those threats coming from software, malware, and wrong design.
Could I add something?
Yeah.
I think that as the enterprise architecture changes, availability becomes more and more important, right? So speed of the reaction to the threat, right? The identification of it, the monitoring of all those protocols, and then your ability to react very quickly from a carrier perspective is key, because you can use geo-blocking to keep them out of the network and make sure that it's clean past a certain point. But you've got to be monitoring, you've got to be watching all the time, and you've got to be able to react very quickly. And then, you have to have data scientists just like they do. They are smart, very smart, and there's stuff that's 0 day, that's new code that we don't understand yet. So once we get view to that code, we have to be able to disassemble it, reassemble it, carve it out, figure out how to change our reaction to that code in an effective way to protect the network. So you have to monitor all the time. You have to be very quick in your response. You have to be very thorough, and you have to have a team of data scientists to do that. And I think that the more that we develop it, the more it will become a managed service for providers. A lot of providers, a lot of companies, they're not in the security business, right? And so the expense or the idea of investing all this money into cybersecurity with limited returns doesn't make financial sense. So they're relying on carriers, they're relying on partners to come with managed services to fill those gaps, augment their staffs, and improve their security posture. And so that's one of our key approaches, is that across our security product set, the majority of it is a managed service. We very rarely sell something that's not managed, whether it be a carrier or to an end user or end company, because those tend to boomerang. They come back to you.
Got it. Yeah, and I think there's an interesting point there, which is there's advanced analytics, but there's a balance with those data scientists, and it's a key part of security. Jake?
Sure. I think tying into that, a large component for us is consistent policies in our security posture and automation to the extent that we can for routing updates, for updates to our systems that are protecting our networks and our customers, to, like I had mentioned before, the routers themselves, withdrawing routes from our network that are being attacked, automated trigger for black hole to upstream providers. We at Bluebird, as much as I would love to have it, don't have a staff of 1,000 security specialists, and I'm thankful that AT&T does, to help write a lot of these policies and discover a lot of these details of the threats and publish to the broader industry. But without that, we rely on, like I said, consistent policy to make sure we're not reinventing our reaction every attack. So we're not rediscovering the threat every time we encounter a slight variant of it, and automation of our systems reactions, our network reactions, and updating of the network, because without that, we just don't have the speed to be able to react quickly enough and appropriately to secure our customers and our networks. So I know the whole industry is driving to that in every aspect. That's a part of the whole software-defined network, obviously, and a part of the operational support systems, doing flow through everything to keep people out of it. But obviously, people are necessary, but without that large force of staff, having the machines do a lot of the work, and learning and reaction is critical.
I think from a software perspective, the bigger risk is not so much on the network operator side. I mean, everyone, to Jade's point, everyone has the same level of resources or whatnot, but in most cases, most network operators are trying to do the right things within the context of their business, their scope, their scale. I think, if you talk about software and risk there, I think the biggest risk from a software perspective is the very basic software that doesn't generally get updated very frequently on all the dumb devices that are deployed as part of the IoT kind of revolution that's occurred. And I think those devices and the proliferation of those billions of devices today and the many billions of devices tomorrow is what creates, particularly at DDoS level, kind of some of the biggest security threats that many of us really have to contend with, and other people in the room. So software, I think in general, is, to Matt's point, the answer is both to your question, but there are definitely positive trade-offs to software, to software-defined networks, to NFV, to automation, to all those things. Those are certainly benefits holistically. But the fact that there's, Nest thermostats and Ring doorbells and nanny cams out there that don't have passwords updated, don't have, software being patched on any kind of regular basis, that's where a huge amount of risk actually lies. I think there's been some litigation passed in California recently where some of the accountability will go towards the manufacturer of those devices, requiring and ultimately penalizing them if those devices are actually used in attacks going forward. And
They're still leaving back doors in there.
I understand that, but I'm not necessarily an entire, advocate of regulatory kind of oversight in every way, but that actually has some merit to it, that kind of an approach. But that's the software that scares me the most. It's not the software that we're using to kind of run our networks or manage networks. I mean, those all can have improved in many ways, but that's the stuff that actually where there's risk in my mind.
So I just wanted to comment on the intersection there with analytics and automation, right? I think automation is going to have a huge driving effect on the way we manage networks and what we can do with them in the future. But as somebody who's sat on a SOC and watched the responses, we had screens, right? Those screens filled with like alerts that just flew by. And if you actually walk in and watch the people that are responding, they're not looking at the screens, right? Because what we've taught them is that they don't have to respond to all those things because there's thousands of events occurring and they don't know what to do with them. So just ignore them, right? And the truth of the matter is you can't blame them for that, because if they ignore one, what's the difference between ignoring one or ignoring 100, right? So I think the power that analytics can bring to it is adding some context, right? Of those thousands of events, which ones do I really need to respond to and which ones do I really have to target? And then when you figure out those events, it's now I'm going to automate this. And as a technical director at the time, there's no way I would have turned over automating my network defense and response to a software program that said, go do this, right? So I think over time, as we build trust, and that's really where you're going to start seeing the data science develop the capabilities to really give you context so that you can build trust in those automated responses and get rid of the noise, right? Allow us to get rid of all the simple things that we can detect with the machines. And then for our smaller security workforce, focus on those things that are actually much more complicated. And IoT is one of them.
I have here a question, just going to the way you are describing here. We used to utilize security operation centers and CEMs to analyze the events. How do you see, it's a question, but we can both answer that, optimizing the big amount of data a SOC or a CM can send versus big data and using artificial intelligence and all those things just to help experts to have that context. Do you see useful to enhance our SOC systems, or just to shift and find now the big data approach?
I personally, I think we're seeing a lot of work being done in that area where we're saying, looking at all the data that's coming into it, and then my personal opinion is that you have to pick the way you go about making sense of all of that data lake, right? Is you pick a type of attack and you go through and you really pull the threads through those logs. And you figure out exactly what this event plus this event plus this event
correlation.
Yeah. And once you're able to add those events that are coming from different points in your network and tie them all together, right? That's how you're going to get the context to do it. It's so hard to sit there and look at all that. NetFlow is a wonderful thing, but we got to the point where a huge percentage of our network was just NetFlow. And
finding the needle in the haystack is difficult, right? And that's especially when it comes to SIM, managed service is key. One of the main frustrations for folks that onboard a SIM, a security incident event manager or monitor, if you don't know what that is, it basically collects all the system logs, correlates them, and then is able to alert. And that gives you an increased response time. But it's very hard to separate out those false positives and figure out which ones to move forward with. And that's where using data lakes and Hadoop and machine learning and artificial intelligence narrows the amount of data that the analyst actually has to review, and it increases our chance of finding the right correlation and then defending that network.
And I think it's key where in the network that data is coming from, right? So the information that I care about at the core is very, very different than what I'm going to look at the edge, right? I'm not going to try to do very fine-grained DPI at the core, right? At that point, I have a very different threat. The threat at that point is somebody trying to compromise, bring down the network, wholesale pulling of data, those types of things. Encryption, those kinds of services work well there. At the edge, especially with IoT, 5G, all those emerging, exploding edge and the number of devices, that's where I think you're going to find the biggest bang for the buck with AI and ML.
Yeah. The other thing that's kind of scary is what some of the supercomputing is going to do to the algorithms and the keys and in particular 256 key bit encryption. As the speed of computing increases, we're going to have to change our cryptology and some of our methods in order to keep up with it. It's a long way from the Caesar cipher. If you know what that is.
So I also think, though, that analytics and these new technologies also provide new business opportunities for network operators. I think about the issue of IoT and DDoS attacks coming from IoT. For the longest time, network operators could really defend the best against DDoS attacks that were coming from spoofed traffic. You filter out the spoofed traffic, you help cut down on the DDoS attack. But now with IoT, the traffic looks normal. How can you tell good traffic from bad traffic when you're sitting as a wholesale carrier? It's a lot harder to do. But there's new technologies that are coming out that can help solve this, and there's places where wholesale carriers can come in. So one of these is called the manufacturer's usage description. Not sure if you've all heard of it. It's a new tool that was just a specification done by the IETF. But basically what it is it's a way for your IoT device to easily create a whitelist for itself. So it can say, I should only connect to 3 places. And if I try to connect anywhere else, have your router block me. And I think the place where carriers come in and network operators come in particular is the places where they already provide a service, whether it's providing the hardware or providing DDoS mitigation services, adding in something like MUD and handling the back-end infrastructure on this. They can hopefully make more money on this while also cutting down significantly on IoT-based DDoS attacks that you wouldn't be able to handle with your normal anti-spoofing techniques.
I absolutely agree with you. Just two additional points. First, we need to work together to accelerate the MUD adoption.
Definitely.
Okay. Second, I think on top of MUD, we can have another kind of open ecosystem based on blockchain technologies. And I think particularly in some domain where we are fighting a kind of worldwide infection, which are the Wangari calls, you know what those calls are. They just call you and they want you to call back to highly rated premium numbers and all those things. It's a worldwide universal infection. The way we want to use, it's one of the initiatives at the industry level. Blockchain is just have a kind of worldwide blacklist ledger of those numbers, and to be sure that we can certify that the number ranges are valid or not. I'm evoking this blockchain techno next to MERD just to tell that we have new opportunities to develop open ecosystems where in a centrally way we can monitor and control the features of the different items flowing in our networks, and to identify their DNA and to say yes or no to the existence in our ecosystem.
Yeah, no, that's an interesting application. You know, Matt, you mentioned kind of the future and scalability and efficiency and how computing power becomes exponential. Are there other key considerations that we should be thinking about to ensure the future scalability and efficiency of implementations around security?
Cloud-based.
Open that up.
Cloud-based security.
Cloud-based.
Yeah. When it comes to scalability and fast to deliver elasticity, I think that for the moment we haven't invented something greater than cloud-based services. That said, the cloud itself must be protected. It's our main engine for embedding smart solutions to scale them up and to distribute them very quickly. But we need to think about the cloud itself, protection and security.
And just for the sake of discussion, I'll go to the exact opposite and say the edge, right? I think you need to do processing at the edge. And then when you combine edge security, edge analytics, edge intelligence with the cloud, right?
Yeah.
That's where you're actually going to find the best combination, right?
Yeah.
I think the cloud, we're doing our big data processing, we're pulling in the aggregate flows, we're looking at, information from all over the network. But there's an element at the edge where you have to do that processing right there, right? Where you have your, compute at the bottom of towers in, these small data centers, where you're able to actually make sense of the information where it's small and something you can actually wrap your head around.
Correct.
We got to pay the hackers more to work for us than the bad guys are paying them.
Good luck. That'll be a tough one.
I think also though you have, going back to incentives, is if we're going to scale something up, we've got to get everyone to do it. And that's the fundamental problem with the routing ecosystem and this whole industry is we all rely on each other and we all rely on each other doing the right thing. And if we don't get people doing these best practices, then it's not going to scale up and we're not going to see a good impact. And so part of the issue here I see is visibility. How do we actually show that we're doing all of these good things as network operators? How do we make it a value add for our customers or make it a value add so regulators stay off our back? And how do we also get each other to do it? Is there things that we can do in terms of peer pressure so that when AT&T says we want to have a agreement with you to carry some of your traffic, we'll charge you more, but if you don't do good security, we need to start doing that as an industry to start making a real change.
I would add that we need consistent regulation. GDPR is a big step in the right direction, some of the laws in California, but we have 47 different cybersecurity laws by state. There's 3 states that don't even have any, which is nuts. But we need some standardization on the regulation. And we need to change the messaging from an IT, security issue to more of a risk management issue. Yeah. When the carriers and the clients begin to look at it from a risk management perspective, I think it changes the non-technical executives' viewpoints and allows them to see how making that investment makes more sense. So standardization of the regulation, as well as sharing the information across the different platforms, the different carriers is key. If we have differentiation and information, say that Orange receives versus AT&T, then it won't be standardized for our end clients. So regulation and standardization are absolutely key to this industry.
I agree with that, and I think we have all to be aware that if we don't, as wholesaler, anticipate the regulatory eruption in our business, someday we'll be hurting and doing some because retail MNOs or operators, and they used to face strong regulatory, let's say, business. But as a wholesaler, I think we are not that often in contact with regulatory aspects. And it's becoming more and more important through the gate of GDPR. Mm-hmm. And GDPR is a complex thing for us as a wholesaler because we are business in the middle. And we are tied upstream and downstream on what the data is being used for. And really, it's a new area where we need to work very, very closely with the regulatory bodies and inside the industry also to see how to address that problem.
Okay. So regulations and also working together in that
absolutely.
Collaboration are definitely 2 key pieces that sound like need to continue to develop as people are focusing on their piece of that network and that end solution. I'm just going to pause for a second. Are there any questions from the audience? I know we've been having some good back and forth here. Are there anything that with this panel up here you'd like to ask? Oh, here, we've got some questions here. So what are the panelists' take on the wide market differences that are present in regulation and compliance? I know, Matt, you touched on that. I think there's holes and it needs some standardization and something we can focus on. Is there anything else anyone would like to contribute to that?
I mean, so I would add, I think regulation at a global level, I think is never going to happen realistically. I think it's a great idea, but I don't think it's practical in the reality of it all. I think a little bit more goes to Ryan and some of the examples he gave. I think as an industry, I think we can get there from a much more collaborative basis. I just think that's always what has led the internet for the last 30 years, and will kind of be the thing that does it as well. I support the idea, but I just think the practicality is really things like IETF, NANOG, APNIC, right? Those kinds.
I'd be happy if we
driving
just
all
did
of
the
that.
states, man.
Yeah, that I didn't know about the 3 states. That's actually really interesting. But I think that's to this question. I mean, that's the reality. The industry as a global, entity, if you will, or structure, kind of has to be the one that drives these things. Realistically,
Maybe we can have another angle of view on that. Regulatory aspect at a global, universal level may be complicated, but if we start layering the approach, first starting with the international bodies working in the industry, IETF, TM Forum, GSMA, if we start just combining our effort in one common labs, because the regulator is waiting from us some level of expertise and coming with a global view. Today we have silhouette bodies working separately. If we just start putting glue between those bodies and building one voice toward the regulatory bodies, I think it could be easing a worldwide view on what should be done.
We have one more question from the audience here, and I'm just going to read it. It said, wouldn't you say the edge is at an awkward phase with the ultimate goal to move to cloud fully? That said, edge could be seen as temporary in that matter. Any thoughts on that?
I'll pipe in and say no. The edge is in an awkward phase. I think, in fact, it's growing. The market's kind of elastic and expanding, saying a lot of the customers and people running in the cloud, this is the best thing ever, and then through time find faults in it and realize that the cloud scale is really nice, but the operational ownership of it, having it in-house, is sometimes nicer, and that depends on your business model. But more so to the edge, that currently a lot of, and probably Matt can attest to this the best, a lot of telco central offices are turning into small data centers where we need compute closer to the edge. We need lower latency, and we need more distributed compute just for the sheer volume of it. Having a massive compute instance in the cloud or in a dozen or so clouds across the nation versus having literally hundreds or thousands of smaller ones, the smaller ones can be more advantageous in a lot of different scenarios. So flat answer, no, I don't think the edge is a phase or is temporary or is any sort of growing pains. Now, in another 4 years, maybe a lot of it goes back to the cloud, but I really don't think so, given a lot of the issues with, again, latency and volume needing to be distributed across smaller instances.
Yeah, well, if the cloud is utopia for the middle, then what are we doing with 5G? Because the 5G is not a cloud-based environment; it's an edge environment. So,
I have a T-shirt that says the cloud is just someone else's computer. So the edge is always going to be there, right? The end user, the end company, the wholesale carrier is going to need that edge, and the issue is going to be getting from the edge to the cloud. And if it gets centralized, that's going to be a more difficult scenario. So having it distributed makes a lot of sense, to Jade's point. And no, it's a strange question. It's not.
The edge is where all the people and all the devices are for the most part. I mean, that's where the internet lives and breathes in essence. We used to call it the internet in the old days. Now there's the cloud. I mean,
interweb.
I think it's actually the opposite. I think, as Jade is saying, I mean, the edge is. It's always awkward. It's been awkward for decades, but that doesn't change the fact that's where we have to live and breathe. Yeah, exactly. So
it's that connection back from the edge to the cloud that we're going to have to worry about. That's where the business happens, right? The man-in-the-middle attacks, the denial of service attacks, not being able to get to your services, or that availability piece. And the CIA triad is really what our biggest problem is. as we move forward as a carrier.
Good. And on that note, I'm going to say thank you to my panel. I really appreciate you all being here. It's very machine learning, advanced analytics, move fast, all work together. So you'll all have SLAs and be working together and collaborative and have figured out this whole global standards and regulations. So I think there's a lot of work to be done. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Mary.
Cam?
Thank you.